The Spinoff Podcast Network.
The PC gave us computing power at home, the internet connected us, and mobile let us do it pretty much anywhere. Now generative AI lets us communicate with technology in our own language using our own senses. But figuring it all out when you're living through it is a totally different story. Welcome to Leading the Shift, a new podcast from Microsoft Azure. I'm your host, Susan Ettlinger. In each episode, leaders will share what they're learning to help you navigate all this change with confidence. Please join us. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
Nau mai, hoki mai ki Otherfold, e mihi ne ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. My guest today is Kevin Chesters. He's an acclaimed advertising strategist from the UK who will be here next week as part of the lineup for Access Speaks, the creative inspiration event which accompanies the annual Access Awards, which is the creative side of the ad industry's big night out. Kevin has had 30 years of experience leading strategy at both agency and client sides. He's served as CSO at Weedon Kennedy in London, at Dentsu and Ogilvy, as well as head of strategy at BT, which is the UK's equivalent of Spark. He then left to start his own consultancy. He wrote a book called The Creative Nudge, which became a bestseller, and he now works with clients around the world, including some in New Zealand. We cover off his career, what drew him to advertising, what strategy is in this context, and why it was the right lane for him. He's very much not a suit. We talk about why he believes there was never a golden age for advertising. That's probably the most fun section. And also dig into the challenges of creativity in the sort of post-monoculture era, and inevitably, and hopefully not boringly, what AI will do to creativity. This episode is part of the Spinoff's 2025 partnership with the Comms Council. Here is Kevin Chesters ahead of his appearance at Access Speaks on The Fold. Sinakwe, Kevin, welcome to The Fold.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So do you want to just tell our audience who might, some of whom might not be familiar with you, just a little bit about your background before we get into this?
Not familiar with me.
Rude, right?
Honestly.
I mean, sort themselves out.
Yeah, my name's Kevin. I've been sort of working in and around the communications industry for about 30 years. Started off in ad agencies, some ones, big global ones like Ogilvy, and I worked on the client side for BT. I started off as an account man. I very quickly realized that job, you got the thanks for nothing and the blame for everything. I met a couple of strategists and I suddenly noticed there was a job where that didn't happen. So I switched over when I was in my sort of mid-20s, and I've been a strategist ever since. I worked at Ogilvy, Saatchi & Saatchi. I then sort of got promoted. I ended up as CSO at Weidman & Kennedy here in London, and then Dentsu, and then my last corporate job, I was CSO Ogilvy here in London, and then I quit. I set up my own thing, which was good. Had a lot of fun with a partner, Mick, who I wrote a book with. I'm sure we'll get into that. And then we went our separate ways, nice and amicably, Mick and I. We sold our thing. And then for the last 2 years, I've been working just for myself. I've been doing strategy work directly with my own clients. And also I run a series of training modules for agencies and clients here in London, but equally I've got clients in the US, Iceland, Germany, Turkey, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and a few other places around the world.
Sounds nice, honestly. Could you maybe just go right back to the start and tell us what drew you to advertising in the first place?
Well, I've always been quite into media things, film, music, TV, was a big part of my life. If you asked my friends from university, the received wisdom of why I got into advertising with all my mates was they reckoned I was too lazy to get past A in the careers dictionary and didn't want to be an accountant. That was the theory with all my mates at uni. But no, genuinely, it was one of those things I didn't really know, like a lot of kids, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went up to our careers service because we had one back then because there was no such thing as the internet. Had a look through a few folders, read a few magazines, did a few of those sort of computer programs where you type in what you're into and it tells you. And so the real story is I did a computer program when I was about 20. Typed in what I was into, media, music, etc. And it said 2 careers it suggested for me. One was advertising, the other was publishing. I didn't know what publishing was, so I applied for advertising. That's genuinely true. I had no idea what publishing was. My dad was a sort of engineer, my mum was a nurse. So, I didn't know anything about that sort of world. So yeah, that was it. It sort of seemed to feed into what I was into. And then the other thing was I applied for a few jobs and didn't get them. And I was fairly stubborn back then. And I thought, well, if I would just stick at it until I got one and did.
So it's interesting, right, that the profession of advertising has, in terms of its perception by the outside world, it's always ebbed and flowed at various times. I was struck recently rewatching Mad Men. There's a few scenes, particularly involving Pete Campbell, this young suit, where there's just this absolute opprobrium heaped on him for being in advertising at all, that a serious person, an ambitious person wouldn't be there. And you actually sense that around the edges a lot. Is that, like, when you entered the profession, had that faded? Did you ever sort of feel that, or was it starting to come into that time when you sensed that a campaign could change the trajectory of a business? Was all that starting to be well understood by the world?
I think so. It's interesting. I think I'm not sure there's another profession that's quite so prone to self-flagellation as the ad industry, right? Genuine true story. The morning I joined the advertising world, and because I have autism, I always remember dates. So I joined the ad industry on the 5th of June, 1995, okay? And I remember the day I started. I came into the office an hour early because I thought I should, to show willing. And my boss at the time was very lazy, so he arrived an hour late. So I had 2 hours to do nothing sitting in this empty office. And his secretary, because back then everybody had one, said to me, well, why don't you read through the newspapers, read through the magazines, and then when he comes in, you can tell him what you've noticed that might be interesting for new business or opportunities from the papers. And the reason it sticks in my head is I remember the first thing I did was I picked up a copy of the Marketing Press. It's a magazine called Marketing Week. And the opening article I read in it was called Advertising is Dead. Right? And I thought, oh my God.
Spectacular timing.
I've just chosen this profession and it's dead. And I honestly swear, Duncan, I've read a version of that story once a week for the last 30 years. It's still a $750 billion industry, right? So it's not doing too badly, and it's growing about 4% year on year. So I think, I think it's an industry that's always kind of in this slightly weird cycle of self-flagellation. Like, is it over? Did it used to be better? Does anyone take it seriously? And I'm not sure really that anything particularly changes in that dynamic. It's interesting for me that every minute I've been in this industry, somebody's pinned me up a wall in a pub and said, well, advertising doesn't work. I've never bought anything off the back of an advert. Yet, weirdly, it's a $750 billion industry that doesn't work. It seems a bit strange to me.
It does seem strange. It's also an industry that's undergone in that period of time from mid 95 to the present quite an extraordinary amount of change while growing and changing, which I think we'll get into. In terms of that early career, you had that leapt lanes from suiting to strategy. What was it, apart from the fact that you got complained at less, that prompted the move?
I just got genuinely quite bored. I was doing my job. I was good at it. I enjoyed it, but I was quite unfulfilled. It was quite repetitive. And I was very lucky. I met a guy who was a planner, strategist, right? And we got on very well and we worked very closely together. And I can remember saying to him, he was a little bit older than me. He was about 10 years older than me. And I remember saying to him, look, I'm thinking of quitting. I've been looking around and there's other things I think are kind of more interesting for, what I do, thinking things like management consultancy and various things. And he said, do me a favor. He said, write down on a piece of paper. I've given this advice to lots of people since, but this was the first time he gave it to me. He said, write down on a piece of paper everything you love about your job, and then write down on another piece of paper everything you don't like about your job. Just do me that favor and give me the two lists. So I went away for a couple of days. I thought about it quite hard and I wrote these two lists and I gave them to him. And he took one look at them and he just said, Kev, you're not in the wrong industry, you're in the wrong job. And I told him what I liked. And I liked people. I liked human behavior change. I liked insight. I liked turning large amounts of information into small amounts of insight. And he just took a look at it and goes, mate, every single thing you've written down that you like is the job of a planner. Why don't you become a planner? So the next day, because when you're young and ambitious and impatient, I went to the head of strategy in my agency, which was Ogilvy at the time, and said, I want to be a planner. That guy said, it's just bad timing. We haven't got any roles for you right now. So again, being ambitious and impatient, I went above his head to the MD, who said, okay, well, there's no roles here, but we're part of this big network. I'm sure there must be roles in the network. He made a couple of calls. I was at what's now Ogilvy 1 at the time. He made a phone call to the head of strategy at Ogilvy and Mather, the ad agency, who was an amazing lady called Janet Grimes. We had a 15-minute cup of tea and I had a job after 16 minutes and shifted over in there.
It's a pretty good kind of testament to a kind of doggedness and ambition, I have to say. Once you got there, was there a particular piece of work or campaign or just moment where you sort of that sort of sense of the things that you were interested in coalesced into a moment that where the future started to become visible through it?
I wouldn't say when I went there, I had a pretty the agency was going through a bit of a time of it. New CEO, things weren't really working. They'd lost a lot of business. It wasn't a good time. Agencies go through cycles like that. It wasn't a good time to join. I wasn't particularly supported as a junior who knew probably less than nothing. So it was probably about 10 months into that. It was a busy year. I got married, so I wasn't particularly fussed about my job. I got another job. An ex-client of mine phoned me up and said he was setting a thing up. It didn't have any strategy. Did I want to come over? There was lots of interesting projects. It was during the whole .com time, so there was a lot of money slopping around everywhere. And I did a year with him, and that was fascinating as a year. Because of that year, I then got my job at BT on the client side. And it was probably then that I started to see it was just more interesting. There was lots of good research work going on. It was a very interesting time. I've always loved technology, and it was a really interesting time in technology. Britain was just about to launch broadband. We did at BT when I was there as the client. Lots of good stuff, I would say. But there probably wasn't one incident at the time. It was probably just I realised I've had a lot over the years of people say to me, oh, I couldn't be a planner, I couldn't be a strategist. And I've always thought that was a bit weird. Because if you're above a certain level, and that's not a high level, if you're above the level of account manager and you couldn't be a planner, there's something wrong. Because all you're really saying is, I can't think strategically, which is a bit of an admission, I think. if you work in any business. And so what I noticed sort of slowly over the course is once I was divested of all the things, like dealing with the client, managing the billing, managing timing plans, once I got rid of all that stuff from the account management, I could suddenly focus 100% of all my time on the stuff I enjoyed. When I realized I really loved my work. And so I think it wasn't one particular incident. It was just this sort of growing feeling over 3 to 4 years, mostly when I was at BT, that this was really interesting. I mean, I've been asked before about what it is about planning. What is the thing that makes you a good planner? And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I think it is sort of a fascination with people and a kind of curiosity about solving problems. And I've always liked both those things. And so, once I didn't have to do the account management bit anymore, I honestly just find problems endlessly fascinating. Whatever it is. People, if someone asks you a question, you don't know the answer. I really love that feeling. And that happens a lot in strategy. They'll sort of go, well, why do people buy this? Why aren't people doing that? How do we get more people to do, whatever it is we're trying to get them to do? And it's just about human behavior. I've always said there are only 4 briefs in the world. I reckon there's only 4. And over 30 years, I haven't managed to find a 5th. They are get someone to do something, get someone to not do something, get someone to do more of something, or get someone to do less of something, right? And all of those briefs are basically behavior change briefs. And that's what got me really into sort of that world.
So you're talking about, and you made reference to then the sort of the .com boom and the sort of the first flourishing of the internet, which now is obviously very mature, but going through another of its kind of periodic change moments or potentials for it with the rise of generative AI. And yet there is a sort of a perpetual sort of nostalgia for earlier times, for simpler times. We exchanged emails about this, and I really liked your response, the kind of challenge it represented, that there never was a golden age, and that whatever you're in right now, if you're of a particular age, that you'll probably remember it that way. Do you want to present that argument? Because I do think there are a lot of people who think that the shift to retail media and the vast splintering of audiences and platforms has rendered advertising a fundamentally less creative space than it was during a more monocultural era.
Yeah, I think, first off, like advertising is a big term. I think a lot of times when people are talking about it, they're talking about direct response advertising or DR kind of stuff, right? But my thing with it is, as I said, 30 years ago when I joined the industry, all I was hearing from people was, gone to hell in a handcart, the backside's fallen out of the industry. It was way better 15 years ago. And I've sort of heard that argument keep going. And, it's what, first off, what is it that's really affecting the industry, right? I'm old enough. I've seen a lot of hype cycles, right? So when I joined, there was no web, right? And then there was. And then it was mobile and WAP. And then it was like, social. And then it's the metaverse and Web3. And now it's AI. And, it's always going to be the thing that's the death of because it's the future is, And I've seen it so many times. And yet I've still seen that the thing that drives profitability and drives impact is creativity, right? But the argument, I think, the one that you and I were chatting about. So humans suffer from nostalgia bias, right? We do, right? We always look back fondly, particularly to our youth, when it didn't hurt as much when we got up in the morning, we were more relevant, all that we could look at the charts and we'd know all 40 songs. You could look at, festival lineups and you'd know everybody on every stage. And now sometimes you struggle to name the headline act. So what happens is people look back on times, when they were more important or more relevant and they venerate those times, right? So you get this sort of thing that, ads used to be great. They were amazing. They were much better than now. And you go, were they? When? And I get people sort of talking about, the noughties, or wasn't it? I'm like, well, I worked in advertising then, and everyone was saying that everything was shit compared to what was going on 20 years before. And I think you get nostalgia bias, right? And I find this particularly in older creative directors. It's like, oh, everything's crap now, and it used to be amazing. I'm like, really? I mean, look, my view is that there used to be some great ads. There used to be some terrible ads. And 95% of the ads were kind of forgettable landfill, which is exactly the same as now. But what happens is, A, you look back fondly, so rosy retrospection or nostalgia bias, it's known as. But the other key thing, and I think this is more scientific, is survivorship bias. So what you remember from back then are the good ads. In the same way that you remember the good music, the good sitcoms, the good films, it's because they've survived. And so because they keep being replayed and put into kind of retrospective programs and the 50 best this and the 100 best that, the really good things survive. They're like viruses. You have to be strong enough to transmit and to survive and transmit, right? So we remember the good stuff because it's come with us. Of course, we don't remember the 95% of forgettable crap, do we? Why would you? So I think that's the thing. I don't think there was a golden age. I don't think there were good old days. I think there were just days. And so, yeah, there's some great work from back in the 70s and 80s. But, for all the great ads of the 60s, there was an awful lot of pap, Duncan. And, and I was doing out my family home recently, and I found a load of old newspapers and a load of old magazines, from the late 80s. And you open them up, and I can tell you, they're not full of absolute pearlers, every single one of them deserving to be in the pages of D&AD. Most of them are just flogging slacks and vacuum cleaners and, big corner folds and starbursts, just like now.
I think I buy the thesis in terms of that sort of big forgettable middle. The thing that I'm kind of curious about, because is more in some ways on the media side, in that there were functions to the monoculture which meant that everyone got exposed to something. And part of that top 40 thing was because there were fewer channels of transmission, because I think you're right about that. But I don't think there are many people now outside of very extreme cultural realms who have that conversance with the whole of pop culture, because I think we're much more algorithmically served things, and therefore that sense of advertising or any form of culture as having the big mass impact, explosive relevance. I just think it's harder to achieve now. Would you concede that?
I think that's fair. But equally, the flip of that for me is you have to try harder. So back in the day, you could produce some utter crap, and in the UK, there'd be 20 million people watching it because there were only 3 TV channels. That doesn't make it good. It means that you've got a captive audience. I still think there are great shared cultural moments. Okay, and I'm not just talking about Super Bowls or Christmas TV work, all this sort of stuff. I look at things like, the sort of Traitors finale, White Lotus, all this sort of, there are still moments of shared cultural enjoyment. If you're talking about TV, I mean, I don't know. I think you just have to try harder. I still think great work survives. I still think it gets talked about. I still think, people will remember it. And like I say, I kind of reacted really badly because I get triggered quite easily. I have autism, so I get triggered quite easily. And somebody put something on LinkedIn about, it was an ad from 2003, and they kind of went, oh, well, that's the last good car ad, probably the last good car ad that was ever made. And I'm like, really? Really? So people think probably the best car ads that were ever made things like Honda Cog and Impossible Dream, from the UK, or Skoda Cake, my favourite car ad, or, the Force from VW, all these amazing things that happened. Now you can go, God, that was ages ago, that was a decade ago. But back then everyone was saying, well, all the ads are crap compared to 20 years before. And I just wonder if still I'll get people, if I'm luckily still alive and chatting to clients in 15 years' time, I'll get people going, well, everything's shit now, Kev, compared to 2025 when it was all absolutely amazing, and I get the media argument, Duncan. I genuinely do. I think, we do have less opportunities for sort of big shared cultural moments with which advertising can insert itself.
They still exist, right? I think I buy the argument. Thinking about that, in some respects, there has been this huge kind of juggernaut growth of retail media in the past decade or more, and often that can feel in tension with or competing with sort of brand or more creatively driven media. What do you make of that phenomenon? Do you feel like it's imbalance, or am I sort of misdiagnosing that tension, that they're sort of fundamentally different disciplines?
What's interesting for me, obviously, like the central thesis in this is, of course, Les Binet and Peter Field's The Long and the Short of it, right? You've got the short-term work, you've got the longer-term brand-building work. The most interesting word in the sentence, the long and the short of it, is not the word long or short, it's the word and. It's these two things working together. It's always been the case. How do you win a war? How do you win a battle? Win the skies, boots on the ground, right? Air cover and troops, right? And you need the stuff, the brand building stuff, in order to make the direct response stuff work harder. There's only one reason you do brand work. It's so your direct response work is more efficient. It's the only reason you do it. Otherwise, the most expensive way to do direct response advertising is direct response advertising, because you've got no interest or no awareness to harvest. So it's just costing you a fortune. And this is what's happening, that you're alluding to in the sort of retail, whether it's sort of meta ads or the rest of it. It's just really, really, really expensive, because essentially in that case, all paid media is an attention bribe. You're paying people to steal a few seconds of their time to tell them something you want to tell them, but they don't want to hear, right? So I think the thing is, smart, experienced clients get it, and they always have. That you build awareness and then you harvest that awareness. That has not changed over decades. It's just the fact that now there's been this sort of what I would call media crack, where suddenly people have got really addicted to this sort of short-term digital media that, gives you sort of an instant gratification of put money in here and you see an effect over there. But when you actually take a step back and look at it with perspective, it's really just a massively inefficient and very expensive way of spending your media dollars. And the thing is, when there were loads of media dollars to spend, it's always easier when you're spending someone else's money. So if you get lots of private equity money coming in and giving you shitloads of budget to go and waste on loads and loads of ads to build vanity metrics like users and signups, of course you're going to spend it all. And then when you run out of someone else's money, you take a look at it and go, well, what have we actually built? The answer being sod all, and why most of them went bust. The ones that were smart, the clients that were smart, didn't spend all of their money on brand building or all of their money on direct response. They worked out the correct balance. Now, Binet and Field reckon it's 60-40. That is obviously an average. So in categories that are lower interest, you have to spend more on brand because there's no interest in the category, so you have to create it. But that's the thing. I think that, like a lot of things, it's encouraged, like the growth of that sort of, as you call it, retail media stuff, whether it, digital or whatever, social. All it's really done, like a lot of addictive things, is it's been very, very attractive and irresistible to people who want to get addicted and then feed their addiction. The very smart clients, the experienced clients, and that's not necessarily an age thing, intelligent clients understand the balance between short and long-term metrics and media that drives big business results like, awareness and profit and price elasticity and all the rest of it. They understand the media that drives that. And then they understand that once you've built that awareness, we know it. We know it from all analysis. The number one driver of media profit, of advertising profitability, the number one thing is awareness. And the second thing is creativity. It's not a debate. We know what drives that through all the amazing work that was done, Data Decisions, Kantar, lots of this stuff, right? So, yeah, my view of it would be, yes, it has changed things. Yes, in most cases, it's changed things not for the better. But in some ways, Duncan, it's just really digital Darwinism. It's the smart clients who've spent their money well with intelligent agencies will survive, and the other ones will go to the wall, and I don't have very much sympathy for them.
No, I think that's very well put.
Campfire season's back, and that means s'mores. But when you're at home treating yourself, take them over ice with Dunkin' S'mores Cold Brew Concentrate. And suddenly you're always treating yourself. The home with Dunkin' is where you want to be. Click or tap the banner to shop now.
BTW FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an gestural implant, 68 milligrams radiopaque. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
Take your plans out of the group chat and get long weekend ready in new Abercrombie. From day to night, pack new outfits for every part of your itinerary. Grabbing brunch? Throw on the A&F Mila dress. Then head to your dinner reservation in their new bubble hem mini dress. And yes, permission to overpack for pics with the girls. Abercrombie's best-selling Scarlet Squirt deserves a post in your feed. Your plans are worth it. Shop Abercrombie's new long weekend collection online or in store.
Should we talk now about, your own writing and what prompted you to kind of basically start, you definitely know what publishing is now. Tell us about your books.
Yeah. And the question, what started me to do it? So, interestingly, I have an incredibly super smart creative partner who was my CCO at Ogilvy, a gentleman called Mick Mahoney. And then he and I did our own thing together for 4 to 5 years. And then we split apart. We do our own things now, but we come together and we still collaborate on a number of projects. We're doing one at the moment for Pure Gym here in the UK. But we both have our own separate things now. When he was at Ogilvy, I was doing a series of sort of training things for the whole agency. And I asked him if he'd do one. And he said, "What do you want me to do it on?" I said, "Well, why don't you talk about creative?" He said, "Well, that's not exactly original, is it, Kev? Creative director comes on and talks about creative." He said, "I'm not going to do that." He said, "But I'll tell you what I will do." He said, "I do think, actually, that creativity is the number one life skill people need. I think it's the number one thing, in the world that's going to sort of make the world a better place." He said, "And I've always sort of thought that there are quite a few rules to creative that we should apply to everything." Anyway, we got chatting about it. He did a talk. He basically did what he always did. He said, "I've got this theory, Kev. Can you go away and find all the science to prove it?" Right? It's how we tend to work. He has the right answer, but doesn't know why it's right. I don't have the right answer, but I can find out why his answer is right. So he wrote a series of things around creativity, and then he and I sort of sat down, worked on it, made it a presentation. Anyway, the next day he was chatting to a lady who he did a lot of coaching work with, who also happened to work at a publisher's. She said, "That sounds like an amazing book. Why don't you write it into a book proposal?" He did. and we were immediately offered a book deal. Now, people always talk about, ask, how do you get a book published? What's the thing? It's like, honestly, it was the easiest thing in the world. Like, normally you have to go through a million. Honestly, the first meeting, the first conversation we had about it, someone came along and offered us a book deal. And I know that's...
So you know almost nothing about how to get a book deal because it just happened.
No, I know nothing at all about how to get a book deal. So basically what came about then was us putting the book together, which is just the importance of creativity, why creativity is so vital in the world, which is obvious if you think about it, right? I mean, if you look up the word creative in any dictionary, creativity is not a department, creativity is not a job title, right? If you look up the word creativity in a dictionary, it will say new and different thinking. That's all it is. It's the pursuit of the new. But then we started asking ourselves, well, why is this so hard? Like, if creativity is amazing and is what unlocks everything, and De Bono said that creativity made life more fun and more interesting. He also said it was the key to all progress because you have to go somewhere new. We were going, well, if that's the case, why is it so hard? Why does everything look the same? Why are all ads the same? Why are all films the same? Why is everything so homogenous? So we started looking into that and realized it's because if creative is the pursuit of the new, humans find the new incredibly difficult, right? So because two things stop humans being creative. One of them is biology. So your natural programming will tell you not to do new things. Because back in the day in evolution, anything new was likely to kill you. Okay? Or at least give you a quite prominent visible scar. So if your brain sees new things, it wants to run away from them. The second one, though, that was much more dangerous to creativity is sociology. So biology is the first, sociology is the second. The desire of society to make you want to fit in and do the same thing, which is, because interestingly, people find it difficult to imagine, particularly Gen Zers, but there was a time before supermarkets, the police force, and dating apps. And in those days, if you wanted to eat, you wanted to feel safe, or you wanted to get laid, you had to be the member of a tribe. And if you went against everything the tribe wanted to do, you were kicked out of the tribe. And if you kicked out the tribe, you died. So your biology and your sociology is basically stopping you from being creative. So that's what the book's about. It outlines why creativity is the key to all progress and happiness. It then explains why that's impossible for humans to do, the nature and nurture, the biology and sociology. What it then outlines is what Mick wrote in his original presentation, the 9 things that you need to do, right, to be creative. Each chapter takes one, explains why it's difficult, gives you the antidote, and then gives you nudges to put into your daily life to overcome it. So it's a book that's not about marketing, it's not about advertising, despite the fact that it was often put in those categories because of Mick and I's background. But yeah, that's what it is, really. It's a book about why creativity is the single biggest skill you can have in business, and the things you have to do to make sure that you don't allow your natural programming to stop you doing it.
No, it's a really interesting thing, right? Like I'm not sure if you've read it, but Derek Thompson, the Atlantic writer, wrote a book called Hit Makers about basically like just sort of hits through the years in lots of different genres, and that kind of that tension between people want a little bit of new and a little bit of familiar, and the how you kind of inch those things so that's not too much and not too little is how you get the sort of Goldilocks zone of something that transcends the ordinary.
The posh name for it is optimal distinctiveness. So basically you have to, if it's too similar, no one will notice it. If it's too different, everyone will think it's weird. And again, you don't want to be weird. You got kicked out of the tribe if you were weird. Jim Morrison said it best, no one remembers your name when you're strange, right? No one likes you, right? People are strange when you're a stranger, right? So what you need is you can't be too different and you can't be too same. So you need to reach this thing called optimal distinctiveness. It has to be just weird enough. So there's great examples of this in business. So people talk about these great disruptors like Airbnb. What a disruptor. Well, all you're really doing is renting a room. I mean, we've done that forever, right? Everyone's rented rooms.
Well, that's why the name is, if you really think about it, it's such a tedious kind of old-fashioned thing. It's just come to mean something else.
It was an airbed they were renting, right? Anyway, but it's like Uber. Uber's just getting a taxi. It's just got a whizzy app, and you can actually, in the old days when the guy said to you he's just round the corner and you didn't know whether he was lying or not, now you can see on the app whether he's just round the corner. I mean, you can do this with all, the fast food delivery apps. They're not really disruptors. You've always got a takeaway. It's just that they're, giving you named takeaways to get them. So.
Yeah, and they're reducing a layer of friction, which is interesting, right? So if you think about that in the creative context, that there is a lot of what the stratospheric valuations of and the kind of general thesis being advanced by the people who are selling generative AI at a, multi-hundreds of billion-dollar kind of level. Part of, they've got vast amounts of kind of human labor in their sites, but one of them is part of that is nominally creativity. And there are so many different opinions within advertising on whether this is actually going to unlock, take away drudge work and give the opportunity to have more creativity, or whether this is going to just take tens of thousands of jobs and make a small shop able to kind of do the work of a much larger one. Where do you land on it thus far in terms of how it is likely to play out?
Well, every time a new technology comes along, you get two schools of thought. One is, Christ almighty, it's the death of everything. It's going to be the worst thing ever, whatever, right? Then you get the other set of people who, this is going to change everything for the better. It's going to be, as usual, life normally happens in the middle, right? The sort of everything's going to be the worst. I mean, goes back to sort of, the sort of late 18th century when French, weavers were throwing their wooden clogs into, the sort of weaving machines that were going to destroy everything, I mean, so where do I sit on it, right? So I'm normally slightly overexcited by technology, right? I love technology. I'm a massive geek. The best things that are happening with AI at the moment are being done by creative people, right? So the best things in photography with AI are being done by photographers with the right prompts and the right stuff, I think, and I have nothing to back this up, apart from 30 years of experience and a colossal amount of hubristic overconfidence. I think it's going to be all right. There you go. You can quote me on that, Duncan. I think it's going to be all right. Okay.
It's a very clickable headline, I think it's going to be all right.
Kev says it's all okay. I mean, I think, as I said before, that there are always two schools of thought. The death of, the future is, right? Everything's always dead, whatever it is. Telly's dead, radio's dead, video killed the radio star. No, he didn't. The radio's doing fine, and I haven't seen a video for a while. Everything is dead. Everything's always dead, right? And normally the people that are telling you it's dead are the people selling the thing that's supposedly going to kill it or replace it. So, as I say, there's a lot of hype cycles. I've seen enough hype cycles over 30 years to know that I don't think this is the death of everything or the future of all of it, okay? Technology has always been the greatest enabler and the greatest amplifier of human ingenuity, no matter what that technology was, right? It has always been an incredible platform and engine for human ingenuity. And I can't help but think that generative AI will be that as well. Will it put some people out of business? Yeah. Did the internet put people out of business? Yeah. Did mobile put people out of business? Yeah. Did electric streetlights put lamplighters out of business? Yeah. Right? Did cars put horse carriages out of business? Yes, they did. Right? So there'll be a shake-up. There'll be an impact. Will it be as apocalyptic or nirvana as the most positive or most negative predictions go? Of course not. I think it'll be fun. I genuinely do. And I think it will One thing I think it will shake up, if you want a controversial headline, is when I see a lot of the really crap creative that is put out by bang average agencies, I think a lot of them deserve to be put out of business by AI. I think that really great agencies, really great creatives, really great writers have nothing to fear from AI. There are amazing, messy, brilliant headlines that would never have been written by AI and could never get written by AI because they can only be written by human ingenuity. I don't believe that any generative AI could sit in a quiet room and come up with like a prayer, like Madonna once did, right, in her head, right? Will there always be Lady Gagas out there? Yes, there will, right? Great creativity and great ingenuity comes from human heart and human passion and human emotion. So where I think I would finish on this point, because I know you're praying for me to finish on this point, is that the prevailing narrative of the 20th century was man versus machine. It always had to be either this or that, man versus machine. The prevailing narrative, whether that was Terminator, iRobot, The Matrix, whatever it was, that was the 20th century, man versus machine. I think the prevailing narrative, successful narrative of the 21st century will be man plus machine. I think human ingenuity and brilliance meets machine efficiency and amplification. And you put those two things together, and I think we can be unstoppable. That's my positive spin on it.
It's a lovely version of events because there's a lot of both ends out there. Lastly, before I let you go, can you give us a little bit of a preview of what you'll be doing down here for Access and what else you might be up to alongside that?
I have 10 training modules that I run. So I still do strategy stuff to keep my brain in with my own clients. I do lots of strategic projects. But what I do on the side, what I do is my business is I do lots of training. So whilst I'm down there, I have been doing lots of training work with Colenso, BBDO. So I've been doing that virtually, but I'm going to do a face-to-face session with the guys there. They're a brilliant agency and lots of fun. One of my clients is ASB, the bank, and I'm going in there to do some work on best practice of client briefing and how to brief to get what you want. I do a lot of that work with clients. I'll be in Sydney doing it with Telstra and Bank West in July. There's a digital agency in Auckland called D3 that's run by a very dear old friend of mine who I used to work with at BT called Richard Thompson. I'm coming in to do a client event for him and some of their clients, and then I'm speaking at Axis. So at Axis, I'm going to be talking about creativity and why creativity, the power of creativity, and a little bit more of the thesis from the book about why it's so hard and what we can do to overcome it. And then I'm going to be teasing. I'm writing a second book on creativity, but creativity is a life skill. Why it's the most, and the book will be called A Life Skill, Not a Luxury, because people often think creativity is a thing you do when the work stops, when actually it's the most vital thing you can do in work, regardless of what your work is. And it's because creativity in humans allows you to endure the unendurable, adapt to the unthinkable, and overcome the insurmountable. And basically, it's the one thing that has always driven human progress. And it starts with enduring the unendurable, because when the brain is taken somewhere unendurable, from locked-in syndrome to shipwreck to solitary confinement, if the brain is put somewhere that it can't endure, it takes itself somewhere, which is called captive imagination, sorry. Once you've endured the unendurable, you can then adapt to the unthinkable. So three of the biggest drivers of human creativity over the years have been war, natural disaster, and pandemic, right? When you have to get creative about something you do, so you then adapt to the unthinkable. And once you've done that, you can overcome the insurmountable. And it's amazing then what happens to the human brain. And then Once you get out of those bits, it's been proven by numerous scientific studies that creative endeavors make humans happier. So you start off very miserable, enduring the unendurable, but you finish up in sort of literal paradise and pleasure, because that's what creativity drives. So it is the single most important life skill you can have. And if you don't want to take my word for it, the World Economic Forum designated creativity as one of the key five skills humans will need to succeed in the future. And UNICEF, there you go, World Economic Forum to UNICEF. There's two diametrically opposed organizations. UNICEF designated it as one of the core skills that all children will need to succeed in the future. We need creativity. It's what will save us as a species.
I mean, given the general climate that we're staring at right now, that feels like a good positive note to end on. Really looking forward to the talk, and hugely appreciate you coming on the fold today, Kevin. Thank you.
Mate, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk at you for an hour.
Not at all.
We'll see where we go with that. I look forward to seeing you when I'm down there.
Absolutely. Same goes.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.